Well, former U.S. President and current Republican candidate has warned of a potential bloodbath if he's not elected into power later this year. Donald Trump also says there won't be another election in the U.S. if he fails to win the November presidential poll. His comments have been sharply criticized by President Joe Biden, who's hoping to stay on for another term as U.S. president. Well, let's bring in Nsé Ufot, who is an activist and political commentator. She joins us from Atlanta, Georgia. It's great to see you, Nsé. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. Yeah, so two chilling comments by Donald Trump that there will be a bloodbath and that if he doesn't win, there won't be another election in the U.S. Nsé, are you there?
I'm here. I apologize. Good morning or afternoon.
Yeah, good morning to you. Good afternoon to us. Chilling comments by Donald Trump.
Without question. Listen, Donald Trump does not deserve the benefit of the doubt. I've seen a lot of the media coverage in the 48 hours since the presidential rally in Ohio bend over backwards, do all kinds of positions to contort themselves to add additional context. And the truth is, Donald Trump doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. He said what he said, that what we saw on January 6th after there was a Democratic trifecta in the House, the Senate, and President Biden won the White House. He sparked violence. There was a failed murder plot to kill the Vice President of the United States, to harm the Speaker of the House, and to interfere with the counting of the Electoral College. Yeah. They were introduced with the January 6th prison choir, right? That I don't know what more people are looking for to sort of assess the harm, the danger, and the violence of the rhetoric of the former and disgraced president of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's always funny about these stories is, you know, and I'm using the term funny very loosely, is that he was campaigning for Senate candidate Bernie Moreno in Ohio when he was making some of these comments, right? And it's very interesting because Moreno himself is a one-time critic of Trump. He said, he supported Marco Rubio for president in 2016 in the primaries. He once tweeted that listening to Trump was, quote, like watching a car accident that makes you sick, but you can't stop looking. In 2021, NBC reported on an email exchange around the time of Trump's first presidential run, where Moreno referred to Trump as a lunatic and maniacal.
Listen, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And what we are seeing is Donald Trump having secured the early nomination within his party's primary process. And you're also seeing conservatives who lack the courage to say directly to their supporters, to voters, to donors, the amount of harm that this president is conducting. I think that, again, we are seeing Moreno, we have seen Mitch McConnell, we have seen Senator Lindsey Graham all backtrack on their criticisms of Trump when it was politically expedient to align themselves with him. So they lack courage, they lack integrity, and this seems par for the course for this current version of the Republican Party.
Yeah. Look, to his credit, Moreno did get on stage in Ohio and he did say, I support President Trump's policies, but I don't like the man.
I don't know what that means. I mean, because his policies are promising a bloodbath. And again, people were dancing aggressively to try to reinterpret what he meant by that. But 100% tariffs on foreign cars doesn't sound like it is rooted in anything. And it doesn't sound like the disgraced former president of the United States, Trump, is actually, in fact, interested in supporting the auto industry or the workers who make up that auto industry. UAW workers, the United Auto Workers, were on strike, and President Biden is the first president in U.S. history to walk the picket line. That was within the past last year, where was the disgraced former President Trump? Again, when auto workers and the auto manufacturers themselves were talking about the crisis that they were in and the support that they needed from their federal government. So it doesn't track the sort of the distinction that people work really hard to separate the man from his policies. It's fallacious.
Yeah, yeah. What's scary as well, Nsé, is that President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, also faces criminal indictments, right? He's got 4 charges on he's been charged in 4 separate cases, from his handling of classified documents and, of course, what you mentioned at the start of our discussion, his efforts to overturn the results in the 2020 election. And what's fascinating about the U.S. is that even, despite these criminal charges, it doesn't stop him from holding not only public office, but the #1 seat in public office.
Absolutely. I think that the amount of grace that has been extended to the disgraced former president really is formidable, and I would like to see that extended to just regular people and civil servants. Because you've also forgotten to mention is that he's also a rapist. And that not only is he been determined to be a rapist by courts in the United States, he also now owes nearly $500 million US in fees and fines and restitution that is owed to his victims. And that number is going to continue to climb. And so not a good person, but also not a good leader or servant of the American people and their ambitions for themselves and their families, their communities, and their countries in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's devastating, isn't it? Who will hold the moral high ground if come November Trump is voted back into power?
I mean, the moral high ground has and always will lie with the people. But what I will say is that there are things that can be done between now and November to, one, neutralize the impact of disinformation and misinformation online. The majority of Gen Zers and younger millennials are getting their information about government and elections from online. Understanding that, talking to the young people in your lives, that the folks who are voting for the first time in these presidential elections were born in 2006.
Yeah.
And they have a completely different view of what is possible in this country, what is acceptable from our public leaders, and they have demands and expectations from their president. And so I think that that's going to play out in these elections as well. I think that combating and neutralizing voter suppression, right, that there's states like Georgia, across the South that have a long and a recent history of trying to suppress the votes of particularly young people, poor people, and black voters in their states. And so there are many things from litigation, education, sort of an analysis of analyzing the voter rolls that can be done before Election Day to make sure that people aren't improperly kicked off. And then it's going to take all of us on Election Day and in the days after when the votes are being counted to make sure that civil servants and elected officials are protected and don't meet violence from insurrectionists and Trump supporters, et cetera. So there's a lot that can be done in order to ensure the integrity of our elections and to keep people safe.
Yeah. And say, how much of this is complicated by the fact that Joe Biden is the Democrat candidate for these elections?
I mean, I think that Trump's bad behavior would be present regardless of who he was facing on the other side. I think that in fact, essentially a 2020 rematch complicates things because of our sort of desire to pull lessons and pull threads. I think that 2024 is a completely separate context from 2020. If you recall, in 2020, we were in the middle of a global health crisis, the pandemic. There were lots of states in the U.S. that changed their election laws to make it a lot easier for people to vote by mail and vote from home. And we saw historic participation in the U.S. presidential election. I would also add that just nothing focuses the mind like the credible threat of death. And at that time in 2020, we had a president who was telling Americans to drink bleach and look into the sun as a way of combating COVID. And so that heightened the threat level. And again, because people were home, their minds were focused on the election. I think that we are in a noisy electoral environment, a noisy digital environment. And with the advent of technology like AI and deep fakes that, surrounding President Trump with happy, smiling black people, even if one hand has 4 fingers and the other has 10, right, creates a narrative about who is supporting him. And so I think that the 2024 electoral environment does not parallel well with 2020, but we know who Donald Trump is and we know who President Biden is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not even a case about, talking about their ages, because Trump he's 77 years old. Biden is 81 years old.
Right. I think that when we were in primary school, 4 years of an age difference mattered significantly, but when you're octogenarians, not so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose there's a broader discussion to be had as well. We talk about it here in South Africa all the time. Getting younger people into cabinet, people who are more in tune with what it is that young people need. In South Africa, the bulk of our youth are unemployed, and yet the bulk of our cabinet are of a much older generation, So it's a discussion for the U.S. to be had as well. Are there no other viable candidates?
I think that there are several other viable candidates, and I am excited in the South African context and in the U.S. context to sort of welcome this new generation of leaders who raise their hands and say, I have a plan, I have an idea. I think that the future of South Africa, much like the future of the United States, is and will be determined by what we do now. And so we are seeing young people accept the call of leadership. Yeah. We are seeing young people organize their demands of elected leaders, if it's from employment and the economy to extreme weather events and climate change, that we ignore these demands and we ignore this organizing at our own peril. Would I have liked to have seen younger candidates all across the board and all across our countries? Absolutely. And I think that time is coming, that we are watching that now, that people are organizing themselves, organizing a demand, building relationships in their communities, in townships, and I look forward to seeing what the fight for the future looks like, led by these young folks.
In our lifetimes, Nsé Ufot is a political commentator and activist joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Nsé, thanks very much indeed for your time.